I'm very happy to join you this morning for the Urban Land Institute Asia Pacific Summit. This is the first time the event is being held in Singapore, so let me start by warmly welcoming all our overseas guests. We are very glad to have with us such a distinguished group of experts and planners to discuss a topic that's close to our hearts, the issue of how to create innovative and competitive cities. People sometimes say that they look to Singapore as a model in searching for the answer, but we don't claim to have all the answers. Our approach is one where we say we are always continuously progressing towards our final destination. We have not arrived. I don't think we will arrive anytime soon. And so we are constantly learning and striving to do better. So this morning I will share some perspectives with you, but I also hope to learn from all of you in the subsequent exchange as well. Now, you have all heard of the saying that the test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposing ideas in the mind at the same time and still retain the ability to function. In many ways, this applies to cities as well. In fact, within the city, it's not just holding two opposing ideas, but city planners often have to balance multiple goals that sometimes pull in different directions. For example, we all know that cities need to be livable and sustainable, and that's integral to any city's ability to attract talent and investments. No one wants to live in a blighted urban landscape and a concrete jungle which destroys the human spirit. So it's vital to have good public spaces, walkable streets, and greenery which is accessible by everyone. At the same time, cities need modern infrastructure, transportation, power, water systems that are clean and efficient. Cities need these infrastructure to be competitive and to offer a quality living environment for the people. And to have good infrastructure, you need to make big and bold decisions, to plan and to put the infrastructure in place. It sounds like a straightforward thing to do, but somehow we all know that cities everywhere have found it difficult to do this. And there are several reasons for this. Firstly, sometimes it's due to a NIMBY mindset because people do not want something being built next to their backyard. Sometimes it's opposition from various interest groups, be it local communities or environmental groups. And these groups raise legitimate concerns, but sometimes, even though the concerns can be properly mitigated, and it's very clear from the analysis that the project brings about overall benefits to society, the opposition persists. And so it is difficult to forge consensus on the way forward. Another problem many cities face is that infrastructure projects are very expensive. And with real budget constraints and the natural focus of elected governments on deliverables within their term of government, long-term projects naturally are not prioritized, and governments find it hard to justify projects with little or no immediate economic returns. So it's not surprising that the consequence of all this is that very few infrastructure projects get done. People's needs are not well served, and the existing infrastructure, which is already inadequate, continues to deteriorate, and it's a problem we see in many cities, rich and poor. Not just developing cities, but developed cities as well. On some occasions, the new project proceeds, but the scope of the project is too narrow because the tendency is to go for the cheaper option just to get it financed, but there is not enough consideration for longer-term needs or even other broader environmental and social factors. And as a result, you end up with suboptimal outcomes which may, in the long run, become more expensive. These are real challenges that cities everywhere grapple with, and we all know that there are no easy answers. I don't pretend to offer a solution today. What is clear is that we cannot continue to coast along with the current approach. If you just look at Asia alone, the infrastructure needs are huge. The ADB has estimated that developing Asia will need $1.7 trillion per year in infrastructure from now until 2030. $1.7 trillion a year. This is to meet real economic needs, to tackle poverty and to respond to climate change. The region now invests about 900 billion annually. So between 1.7 trillion annually and 900 billion annually, it's a huge gap that needs to be met. And clearly the status quo is not tenable. Within Singapore itself, we too grapple with these issues, and we are constantly, as I mentioned earlier, searching for new answers. We only have 700 square kilometers of land here. It's far, far smaller than where many of you come from. And as Dr. Seed said just now, it's truly a little red dot. So we scrutinize and we plan for each and every project in Singapore very carefully. But despite our small size, the good news is that we have yet to reach our physical limits, and that's achieved through good planning ahead of time, good long-term planning. And that's why over the coming decade, despite all that you see around us, over the coming decade, we are in fact investing significantly in new infrastructure which we need to stay competitive. We are, for example, doubling the capacity of our airports and our seaports. The airport is in the eastern part of Singapore, which many of you who have come from overseas would have come in through Changi Airport. We are building a new Terminal 5, which will double the capacity of today's Changi. So we will have 2 times Changi Airport in the future. We are doubling the capacity of our seaports too. Our seaports are container ports now in different parts of the island. In fact, we have something very close to the city. And from here, if you look out into the bay, you will be able to see the container cranes. We are shifting that and consolidating all of that into the western part of Singapore in Tuas, and we are doubling the capacity of our container ports. We are also enhancing land connectivity with our northern neighbors, Malaysia. And we are doing that with not just 1, but 2 rail links. We are building a high-speed rail between Singapore and Kuala Lumpur, which will allow for very quick travel between the 2 cities. 90 minutes you can get between Singapore and Kuala Lumpur when the high-speed rail is built. And we are building a new rail transit system that links southern Malaysia and northern Singapore. And that rail transit system will be integrated with our own rail network, so it will be completely seamless. We are also enhancing our own public transport system within Singapore, and if you go around, you will see a lot of construction being built, especially underground. That's because our goal is that 8 in 10 homes will be within 10 minutes walk of a railway station, and we are on track to achieving this goal. At the same time, we are building new growth centers all over our island, not just within the CBD, but beyond. For example, the movement of our city ports. As I mentioned earlier, we are consolidating that in the west. When we do so, this will free up space for us to expand our downtown center, which is where we are today. In fact, the space freed up will be 3 times the size of our current Marina Bay, and that will allow a lot of opportunities for us to expand our CBD area. Beyond the current downtown, we are developing new growth clusters. At the site where the high-speed rail terminus is located, the high-speed rail between Singapore and KL, that's in the western part of Singapore, in a place called Jurong. We are building a new CBD, which will provide another cluster of activities for our companies. And in the northern part of Singapore, where we have the rail transit link to Malaysia, that's an area called Woodlands. We are building another cluster for advanced manufacturing and for digital economies. So we are broadening our development beyond our downtown area so that there will be more opportunities for jobs all over Singapore. In expanding our city, we are also changing the way we build. We are trying out more productive construction methods and leveraging on technological and innovative solutions to be a smart nation. In particular, in transport, we are using sensor data and analytics to manage public buses and to reduce crowding, as well as to shorten waiting times. And these have already been deployed, and we have managed to see some effective results. We are conducting trials for self-driving vehicles for both public and freight transport. One trial involves what is called truck platoons. What are truck platoons? Essentially, it's a human-driven truck that leads a convoy of driverless trucks. So instead of one driver in every truck, that same driver can now transport several trucks at a time. This reduces manpower. It allows more freight movement to be conducted at night to ease traffic congestion. So these are pilots that are being done in Singapore, and in the long term, we believe autonomous technologies will help us reduce the number of vehicles on the road and reduce manpower needed to operate our transport system. Even with all these infrastructure plans, we are committed to keeping Singapore one of the greenest cities in the world. A large part of Singapore today is still covered by greenery. So if you're here and you look around, you say this is highly built up, but not all of Singapore is like that. In fact, a recent study by MIT and the WEF ranked Singapore as a top city in the world in terms of green cover. We have significant green cover due to our parks, our nature reserves, and we are committed to preserving and even enhancing this asset. Today, we have about 300 kilometers of park connectors. In an island of 700 square kilometers, to have 300 kilometers of park connectors is something quite unique, and it's quite hard to find anywhere else in the world. We are enhancing this to 360 by 2020, and we will enhance it further. For example, we have something called a rail corridor in Singapore. It is a stretch of disused railway line from north to south of Singapore, 24 kilometers long, about 10 times longer than the High Line in New York. We are smaller than New York, but fortunately we have a railway line that's longer. So we are converting that into a green linear park, and we are engaging residents who live alongside this rail corridor. There are more than 1 million people living alongside this stretch of rail corridor, and we are engaging in an extensive engagement exercise with them to see how we can make this a vibrant community space. So in 5 years' time, if you come back here and if the ULI decides to host another summit here, you don't have to wait for 5 years. Please come back before that. But in 5 years' time, if you come back here, don't just walk around the city area. You can walk up and down the entire stretch of the rail corridor. You can jog, you can cycle, and you can even do it around the entire island. I've shared with you some of our infrastructure and urban plans over the coming decade. Collectively, it amounts to a major pipeline of new investments, because we believe that's what it takes for Singapore to be competitive and innovative. But we are not just building for the sake of building or going for the biggest or tallest buildings. Our aim is to build a clean, green, and smart city with high-quality urban solutions, and do so in a way that strengthens our local heritage and local communities and enhances the quality of life for all our people. And this is what we are doing in Singapore. What we are aware that every country is different and every country faces its own set of challenges, so there's never a one-size-fits-all solution. In our case, we've had rapid urbanization over the last 50 years, since independence. So we have accumulated some expertise in urban and infrastructure planning, which we are happy to share based on our own experience and perspectives. In particular, we believe Singapore can play a useful role as an infrastructure hub for Southeast Asia or even broader Asian region. Within Singapore itself, we are home to high-quality professional services, including project advisory, consultancy, financing, dispute resolution, and legal services, all of which are necessary to bring infrastructure projects into being. We have an ecosystem that integrates infrastructure players along the entire value chain, be it architecture and engineering, multilateral banks, private financiers, as well as other professional services. So we hope we can play a useful role as an infrastructure hub for Asia and help others develop their own long-term urban master plans and successfully plan and implement infrastructure projects. In fact, this summit itself is just one example of the role that Singapore can play, and we hope it will be the start of many more fruitful conversations, networking, as well as partnership opportunities. So on this note, I wish all of you a wonderful time in Singapore. Do take advantage of the tours that are being planned for you, and I wish you all a successful summit here. Thank you very much.
Good morning, Minister. Good morning, everybody. Some very interesting and insightful ideas in terms of the way in which Singapore is striving to be more competitive and more innovative. I think ULI's mission is really around providing leadership in the responsible use of land and creating sustainable, thriving communities. And we really gather in events like this today throughout the year to really exchange best ideas, best practices, and really talk about the future, about how we help our own communities to be more competitive and be more innovative. Now, recently, our ULI membership came together and we reviewed some of the Committee of the Future Economy recommendations that were made on how Singapore will grow in the future, which is one of the interesting things in Singapore in terms of long-term planning. And we looked at what the impact would be to our industry and our real estate industry. Now, I'd like to ask you a couple questions around this because we'd like to hear more about how we can participate in these different strategies. Now, the first one is really around the master developer role. And the master developer role, to many people in the room, is not a new thing. In other cities, it's a role for a master developer to create different parts of the city. To Singapore, this is new. So could you talk about the role, how this is going to be rolled out, and what are the areas that the private sector could potentially get involved?
Well, thanks very much, Scott. I think you've already started to show a picture on screen, which is the first site that we are putting out for a master developer. It's somewhere in Kallang. It's called Kampong Bugis, and we are putting it out as a large piece of residential land for a master developer to participate in. It's quite different from the usual way we have done things in Singapore. Because of our size, we have always been selling land parcels plot by plot. The developer bids for it, and because they pay a price for it, they will have the commercial incentive to maximize and put that particular plot that they have won to best possible use. But we have been studying land sales and projects in other countries where the developers come in on a larger parcel of land. And I was particularly impressed by some of the projects I've seen. Because in many of these projects which I've seen in London, in other European countries, I have not gone to America to see, I'm sure there are many such examples in America too, but the master developer comes in and takes a long-term perspective of the entire project. They are not out to maximize plot ratio over every single square inch of land, but they do a very nice urban design, green spaces, public spaces. They are committed to providing good infrastructure, and because they take a long-term perspective, they are not even looking to quickly sell the pieces of land that they have bidded for. Right. They take a long-term perspective, they develop, they engage industry partners, and you end up with a very high-quality project. We saw this in King's Cross in London. In Canary Wharf, the master developer even put in money to accelerate the building of the station. Because the government didn't have funds for the station to be built, the master developer took it upon himself to fund the building of the train station, and then they recovered the costs through the retail space that was put out. So we are looking for such long-term, responsible developers to help us in this project. And in other projects as we gain some experience with this model. Like I said, it's a different way of working because in the past, the government in Singapore has been just putting out land one parcel at a time. With this model, we think we have scope to experiment with larger parcels, but as they say, with great power comes great responsibilities. So we would want the master developer who wins the tender for that large parcel to uphold their responsibilities and make sure that a good project is delivered. We are starting here with a residential site, but there will be future sites that are mixed use. We will accord flexibility for the master developer to vary even the types of usage. Right. So these are potential benefits that the master developer will have, and in return, we hope that the master developer will commit to a good long-term project for us.
Well, hopefully many in this room will be part of that process in terms of moving these sites forward. And I think you're welcome to the ULI Fall meeting in Los Angeles to see some American examples of this.
No, thank you. And I would say we are still developing our rules, right? This is the first time we are doing it. We will be happy to, and I mean, all of you who are here in Singapore know our procurement system. and the way we do sales. It's open, it's transparent, it's rules-based, it's completely fair. And that's something that we pride ourselves on. So as we develop these rules for tender of land, we will be happy to take in feedback from developers, from stakeholders, how some of these rules may need to be adjusted along the way. This is just the first site. There will be more sites to come.
Well, now I'd like to talk a little bit about infrastructure. And you mentioned about attracting foreign investors to participate in the infrastructure market. Now, there's also recommendations that we picked up in the CFE report to create catalysts for private sector to grow more capital and encourage more private equity funds to be based here in Singapore. So this is for project financing that could go into the regional market but draw from a global market. Can you talk a little bit more about some of the measures the government is looking to implement to support this growth, and what type of role AIIB and potentially the One Belt, One Road might play in this?
Well, as I mentioned just now, the infrastructure needs of the region are huge. And we know that one of the obstacles to getting more projects done is that there are not enough bankable projects to attract commercial financing. There are many projects, but not enough commercially viable projects, not enough bankable projects. So one of our objectives must be to increase the number of bankable projects in the region. We can do this through various means, and here the multilateral banks like the AIIB and the World Bank can play a role because they have mechanisms to de-risk, to share risk, to share in default risks, and to help reduce the risk of the projects. Right. That's one thing that can be done to make more projects bankable. I think project preparation and structuring is also critical, and here Singapore companies, our banks and firms that do project advisory can perhaps also assist in looking at how to structure the project better. Is the concession period too short? Are the tariff rates and user charges too low? Are there ways in which we can help make the project more bankable? So I think our first priority must be to get more projects bankable. Secondly, once we do that, we should try with more bankable projects to attract sources of finance beyond just bank-based finance. Today's situation, I think the banks are quite comfortable and are happy to lend. But, with Basel rules tightening, with more constraints on credit, especially if interest rates go up, I think there will be, we will need to look out for other sources of funding. And in fact, if you look around the world, we are still in a relatively high liquidity environment where there are tremendous amounts of funds in the world at zero or very low interest rates. They are just earning very, very low interest rates or even zero interest rates, sometimes even negative. And we should be able to attract some of that funds into infrastructure as an investable asset class in itself. And that's what we hope to do in Singapore, and we are trying different ways to go about doing that. Whether to get more banks to raise infrastructure bonds. Some Chinese banks in Singapore have already started to do this, raising Belt and Road bonds for their projects, looking at how we can attract more funds to invest in infrastructure. And one of the ideas we are exploring now is to look at a takeout facility where we go into brownfield projects that the banks have funded. We take them out of their balance sheets so that they can be funded through other funds from institutional investors, insurance companies, thereby freeing up bank capital to fund new projects. So these are ideas that we are working on, and as I said, we hope that in Singapore we can play a useful role as a center for financing of projects, including Belt and Road projects. Today, already, about 60% of projects in Southeast Asia are financed through Singapore-based banks. 60% of these projects are financed through banks based in Singapore. And that's because we have a high concentration of banks that do project financing based here, and also because we have a whole range of services, including legal, arbitration, professional services. a high percentage, almost all of the AIIB projects have arbitration clauses based in Singapore because of our arbitration center. So we believe we can offer a full range of infrastructure solutions and play a useful role in getting more projects funded in Asia.
Yeah, we had a panel yesterday that was on Vietnam, the Philippines, and Indonesia, and this was one of the things that came up in terms of how Singapore could potentially be leveraged as the base to help with the growth of a lot of local funding in those countries. Now, I want to shift a bit and talk a little bit about technology. I think we're going to hear a session shortly on the future and in terms of what's coming with technology. And technology is really driving a lot of innovations in many countries, especially related to the shared economy. We're seeing greater advances in the linking between supply and demand, especially related to urban resources. So shared mobility, shared living, shared working, shared resource pooling in terms of goods and services. So my question is really, how is Singapore handling the pressures on real estate for things like short-term leases or in industrial spaces where the combination of mix of use now is becoming tighter and tighter in terms of the distinction between industrial, residential, commercial? What are some of the lessons that might be learned and that might be relevant to other countries and some of the challenges that you face with this?
Well, Scott, the technology trends are real, they are happening. You know, we had an example of this when we were trying to call a tender for a bicycle sharing operator in Singapore. Huge tender that was supposed to be called for the entire Singapore, months in preparation. And before the tender could even be called, these shared bicycle operators have already come in, didn't ask for permission.
Flooded the market.
They have already penetrated the market. They are everywhere in Singapore, and they are thriving. So we said, look, I think the tender is not necessary anymore. We were thinking in government to plan some nice, perfect solution, very orderly, typical Singapore way, whole of Singapore covered by shared bicycles, and 3 or 4 operators have already come in before we could even call the tender. So this is real.
Right.
I think the technology is moving at a very rapid speed ahead of regulations. Our general approach, therefore, is to say, look, if it's happening, we try not to stifle the innovation. In fact, to the extent possible, we create regulatory sandboxes so that these innovations can thrive. And this applies in all fields. In fintech, we are doing that. We did that for Uber, for Grab, for Airbnb. But as the technology starts to take off, as the solution starts to become more pervasive, and there are more regulatory issues being raised, whether there's a level playing field, whether there are risks to consumers, then naturally regulations need to be put in place to ensure that there are proper regulatory regime. And that's what we do. And we have done that to license Uber and Grab taxis now, so that they are on the same platform as the normal taxi operators. And we are doing similarly with short-term arrangements like Airbnb and other platforms. We will be soon putting out some regulatory guidelines with some safeguards on how these can be implemented in Singapore under a proper regulatory regime that will ensure some level playing field with hotel and other operators, and also provide some assurance to residents who do not want to see their place of residence becoming a hotel. Right? So these are legitimate concerns, and the operators themselves understand what we are trying to do. We give them space to take off, but over time, we have a consultative process to put in place proper rules, and that's what we are doing.
Right. It's very interesting, because I think we'll see that develop over time. I think we'll hear from Vivek in a minute in terms of some of these other areas that will really impact the future. I would like to take this chance now and open it up to the floor. If people have questions, we'll be able to take one or two. I think actually there's questions that have come in electronically. Sorry.
So there's two questions that have come in on the iPad, Scott. One concerns the timing of the new Terminal 5 at Changi, and the other concerns the Minister's comments about the master developer role, asking if there's a risk here of transferring the seemingly high cost of construction and land tender purchase cost to future consumers. Is the Minister concerned about that?
Okay. Well, on the first question, Terminal 5, we are still in the planning stages. We have a Terminal 4 that is coming up first. Because, that's how far ahead we plan. We have 3 terminals in Singapore now, and there is a Terminal 4 which is going to be open this year, in fact. I just went to visit. In fact, if you were to travel to Singapore at some point in time, please do visit the Terminal 4. It's going to be the flagship in Changi for innovation. Truly. Check-in, fully automated. And, we've all seen automated check-ins. This one is different. All right? It's automated to the point of the luggage, drop in, everything is automated. Security checks, you know how whenever you go through a security check, you have to take out the laptop, you have to take out your phone, you have to do all these things. No need. Everything in the bag goes through, fully automated. You don't need people with. You just put it in, and the can or the tray comes back to you. There's a conveyor belt that returns the tray, right? So you don't have anyone at the back packing up the trays and bringing it back to the front. Fully automated, and you don't have to take your notebook from your bag anymore. Leave it where it is, it goes through, it will be scanned. Right? So Changi Terminal 4 is the flagship for new airport innovations that we are testing. If you have a chance, check it out the next time you travel into Singapore. That will be open this year. But after a period of time, even Terminal 4, if we project current traveler growth and traffic, even Terminal 4 will be maxed out, and we will need to prepare ahead for Terminal 5. Exactly when, I can't say, but it probably will be in the not too distant future. So we have already set aside land for this, and we are already preparing in the process of getting the design, the specifications, even the resources set aside, so that we will be ready to go when there is a need to build Terminal 5. That's how we plan in Singapore. That's why when I say we take planning very seriously, we truly do, and we make sure we deliver on the plans. I didn't quite understand the second question. I understand the question, but I'm trying to figure out why there is additional cost. Because, in fact, there may well be savings by a master developer if there is sufficient critical mass and they are able to achieve economies of scale. There may well be savings. So if there is concern about cost, or perhaps if there is concern that a master developer, because of the economic power and exercising that power to raise prices to tenants or buyers down the road, that's a different matter. But I can't see how cost is going to be different whether it's a single site or a bigger site. If anything, it may well be able to achieve more efficiencies in a bigger site, because what we are hoping to do is to get the master developer to put in place more efficient infrastructure. For example, if we do a big site, we would want the master developer to plan for, say, district cooling, pneumatic waste, all of which should be cost-effective eventually for the end users. So that's our hope.
I'm not sure if we have time for one. Do you have a short question? Maybe one more question?
I don't have any more.
Anyone from the floor? Sujata?
Yeah. I'm Sujata from Hong Kong and India, Managing Director of UDP International. I have a question for Minister Wong. You've expressed, and I've heard earlier too, that Singapore is engaging the community more in its planning process, especially with the rail corridor. Do you see future from now going forward that your planning process will also change with truly the people getting involved, and as a result, the way you plan, but also what you actually do would also change, and what you see in the future, say from 5-10 years from now, or maybe 20? Thank you.
Be short response.
Okay. Short answer is yes. Scott asked me to keep it short. Short answer is yes. It has already been changing. I mean, we have had a lot more consultations than ever before. In Singapore, we've had concept plans and master plans, which we put out regularly. And over the years, a lot more feedback, a lot more consultation has been obtained through these consultation exercises, and we have adjusted our plans arising from the feedback. So we intend to do many more of these things.
We've started to use the design thinking process a lot more in all of the larger scale infrastructure, which is interesting, which is going out to the general public and getting feedback. So that's new. That's definitely new in the last few years here. With that, I think we come to a close. And thank you very much, Minister Wong, for your comments.